your room monitor today. Our speakers today are volunteers, and the best way to
Your
thank
call
them
cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again. Announcement.
Weird.
provide honest and useful feedback at the conclusion of the session. Our text master will drop the evaluation in the chat later on in the session. We ask that if you're not a speaker, please remember to mute yourself and to avoid background noise. We'll have a lot of fun, and it's going to be a very informative session. Christine Brady is a past district director of Founders District. She is the recipient of the Resilience Award from Toastmasters International in recognition of leadership through times of uncertainty. In her work life, Christine works as a contract manager for a national transportation analytics firm, where she performed complex analytics analysis and negotiation of contracts documents. Vicki Nasrin is a past district director for District 44 and past regional advisor for Region 2, where she has mentored Toastmaster district leaders on leadership, conflict resolution, and strategic positioning. Vicki has taken things to the next level with leadership of the Find Your Leadership Confident podcast, co-authoring Unstoppable, Being Fierce, Fearless, and I can't even say that word in life, in business and in real life. Please welcome our presenter, Christine and Vicki.
Thank you, Gregory. We are here to talk today about how to build your brand through podcasting. This isn't going to necessarily be a complete how-to. It will just be how we do this. So here's what we'll be covering today in our session. Oh, these are not advancing. Oh, well, my screens are not advancing. Maybe my tech master will tell me what I should do. So we're going to be covering what is a podcast, choosing the right equipment from software to headphones, hosting your podcast platform and the associated cost, branding and developing content, recording and editing your episodes, scheduling your episodes. That's everything you need to know before you hit publish. And we have a few disclaimers. So the first one is we are here to talk about our podcast journey and how we do it. But there are thousands of podcasts out there, and they've most likely been produced 100 different ways. We hope that our methods will give you an idea of what it takes to launch your podcast. Vicki and I have two different approaches. Vicki produces a video podcast, which is hosted on YouTube, and I co-create an audio-only podcast hosted on our website and on audio platforms like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We also have two different purposes. Vicki classifies her podcast as edutainment, where I would classify my podcast as purely social fluff.
So Christine, you might want to try stopping and starting your sharing again. Maybe that'll help.
Maybe that'll do it. Thank you.
Jiggle or wiggle it.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Vicki.
All right. So we have a lot to cover today, and therefore we want to make sure that we get everything in and answer all of your questions. But if you could hold those to the end, and you may hear that what your question was in the beginning is going to be answered throughout. So if you could just please hold those questions, and we have really meticulously crafted this talk, and we want to make sure that we cover everything that is going to help you to take you to be that podcaster. So we respect everyone's time and make sure that we get this done timely. And therefore, we would ask that you just hold those questions to the very end. So what is a podcast?
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, that's a great question. What is a podcast? A podcast is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as a digital audio file that's made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, and new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. Now, the podcasthost.com says, simply put, a podcast is talk radio, but on demand. And since it's pre-recorded rather than live on air, you have the ability to get more creativity and have more fun. A podcast is not one size fits all, and it's also not a narration of someone else's content. Now that we know what a podcast is, let's talk about equipment. Vicki, what equipment is essential to recording a video podcast?
Well, Christine, for a video podcast, the very first thing is you need to sit down and see what your budget is. And the great thing about video podcasts is you can start small and grow into more advanced equipment. So keep that in mind as you're doing your budget. You don't have to have, a television studio in your living room to be able to do it. You need a computer, obviously. You need to have a camera. You can start with the computer camera, but I recommend that you get an external camera. The monitors I use for my purposes, I have 2 monitors. It just makes my life easier as I'm moving information from one piece to another, and I can talk about that later. The microphone I use right now, as you can see, I have just my regular headset. As I get more involved, I am going to be moving to an external microphone with a USB. And that's partly because I'm going to expand to doing some additional kinds of recordings, which are to Audible books as well as voiceovers. And then if you are doing those Audibles and voiceovers, you really need to have a headset, so headphones. So Christine, what equipment do you need to use for recording your audio only podcast?
Well, it is a little easier when we do audio only. Again, we do need a computer. And on that computer, you will typically need to download a free audio editing program. Audacity is free, and that can be used on any Microsoft-based computer. And then GarageBand, if you happen to use a Macintosh. You can also use a service like Podbean. You can record and cast your episodes directly from Podbean, but I recommend having some kind of audio editing system on your computer so that you can really handle those files before you publish. There are definitely lots of choices for microphones. So here's a few things that you need to think about when it comes to a microphone. When you're getting started, you will most likely be recording directly into your computer. However, here's something to consider. If you enjoy podcasting, would you be more willing to spend more money and maybe invest in a mixer or a digital recorder? Now, I have some microphone suggestions listed in a session outline that I'll give to you, and those have some price considerations. But if you think about that you'll enjoy doing this, you might consider a Samsung microphone. Again, I'll make sure I get those notes over to you. For headphones, there's 2 things you need headphones for. One, you need a good quality headphone for editing. So if you ever want to, that's the first part. And if you ever migrate to a digital recorder or audio mixer, your headphones will be worn during recording to make sure that you can hear yourself and you can hear each other. This is so good because you always want to test how you sound before you start recording. I have a problem with not using enough volume when I am recording on the podcast, and my co-creator Danielle, she always feels like she's too loud. So we definitely have to test the distance that we are from our microphone, and our headphones are essential in making sure that we can hear how we are going to sound on that file. Now, we did the first 20 or so episodes without headphones, and we found that recording with headphones has really helped our volume issues tremendously. Also, studio headphones will keep you honest during editing. Low quality headphones are going to boost the bass, and then you might end up with some muffled audio quality. So make sure you're using really good headphones. If you do choose to use a mixer, currently, right now, our podcast is using a Zoom Live Track 8 mixer, and that allows us to record our audio to an external memory card, and then we can transfer it into Audacity when we're ready to edit. It's not required because there's actually lots of options to record directly into your phone or computer, but it works for us. Now,
That's
Vicky,
great.
yeah, it's really good. Another budget consideration, of course, is like your hosting of your website or where you're going to be hosting your podcast. So, can you talk to us about the price considerations you had in setting up your website and your editing?
Well, Christine, as you know, I am one busy lady. And so whenever I decided to go ahead and start a podcast, I knew that I did not have time to build a website, nor did I really have all of the wherewithal to know what I needed to do next. So I chose to do a done for you deal. And so that was a little over $1,000. It was about $1,800 to do it. But I literally had a tutor or a mentor that talked with me twice a week for 2 months. He built my website. He did everything for branding and for what my colors should be, and all of the templates that I'll talk about later to make my producing of this, preparing and producing of my podcast so simple that I highly recommend that. But if you have the skill set to do it, then, it's going to just cost you the cost of the domain and the time cost associated with you building that website. So it all depends on what your time is available and how much you're willing to use that to get started. Okay, so Christine, what are some budget considerations for you?
Well, because
Wait, I'm so sorry. I forgot a key thing. I don't edit my own podcast either. You can get a VA for not too much money, but I have a VA upstairs. It's called my daughter, and she does her own editing. And so I am tapping onto her as long as she'll let me, and she does an awesome job. So I kind of pay her in food and no rent. So Christine, back to you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's okay. And you could pay me in food anytime. All right. So budget considerations when you are hosting an audio only podcast, you need to be hosting on some kind of website or a hosting site in order for a site like Apple Podcast to be able to pick up your file. So if you're hosting your podcast just for fun, maybe just listening only on one platform, or maybe you're not even going to publish this podcast because maybe you're working on the Toastmasters podcasting project, you might want to find out how to host in one place and possibly just the cheapest place. Now, in our case, we wanted our podcast to be easily accessible, so all of our listeners could follow the podcast on nearly any platform. But as marketing and branding fans ourselves, we also wanted to host our own website. That way, our website could establish our brand more fully, and we could carefully craft the language associated with our episodes, and we could set up a site that was ready to scale when we are. So for instance, we like to call our followers of our podcast, we call them obsessors. And we also have a Patreon. So we have our donors. If we had a newsletter, we would have our subscribers. Now, ultimately, we did decide on hosting via Squarespace, but we did investigate Blueberry. They're another hosting platform for podcasts, as well as Libsyn. Podbean, we actually ended up needed to have 2 hosting spots. We have Squarespace, and Squarespace was our main place that we wanted to have everything. And we can actually host our podcast right there. People can go to our Squarespace. It's currently obsessedclub.com. That's our website. And you can listen to our podcast right there. However, Squarespace did not play nicely with Apple. So I needed to find another place to host our podcast in order to have this go onto Apple Podcasts. So Podbean plays very nicely with Apple Podcasts. It's it's very easy to upload that RSS feed in order to have your podcast go live. And so we actually have to post our episodes get posted in 2 spots. They go on our website and then they also get posted on Podbean. Now, once our post is live, it goes live on both simultaneously because we pre-schedule all of our episodes, which I'll talk about later. We pre-schedule those so that they go live at the exact same time. So all of our listeners should be able to access the file at the same time.
Awesome. So we have branding as our next piece. And I touched on how my mentor did all the branding for me, but what do kind of take us through what considerations you took to make your branding what it is today?
Yeah, I'm so happy to talk about that. First of all, I want to be clear because we're all Toastmasters, or most of us are Toastmasters here on this workshop. Our podcast started specifically because of the podcasting project on in Pathways. But we knew immediately when we started talking about just creating one episode, you know, because Danielle and I tend to be a little bit extra at everything we do, we knew that we were excited about having a podcast and we were just going to embrace it. So one thing you need to think about is your logo and your brand. So at a minimum for publishing, you need a square icon that will display on the listening platform. So think about color scheme and what makes sense for your content, your theme, or your goals. Look at podcasts in the same category as yours for inspiration. When it comes to the name, you want to name your podcast just like you would name a business or product. So you need it to be specific enough that people understand what you're about, but simple enough that you're not pigeonholing yourself and inhibiting growth. So you'd hate to name your podcast SeaWorld Exposed, only to realize you want to expose a lot more than shady practices at SeaWorld. Now, in our case, Currently Obsessed was easily transferable with Currently Obsessed Club for our website, email, and social media handles. And that made it feel inclusive of our fans, who we call obsessors. Plus, it was the perfect name for us because we have naturally obsessive personalities and we know we'll never run out of things to obsess over. So Vicki, how did you come up with the name of your podcast?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, my Done For You training, if you will, that 2 months that I went through, part of that was actually the very first beginning was to be able to answer questions from my coach about what my outcome was desired, as well as, you know, who was my target audience and what did I want to really give to that target audience. And I already had a Facebook page, and I already had courses and a website for those courses related to confidence. So I knew that my key thing was going to be around leadership and confidence. So I came up with the idea of having Find Your Leadership Confidence, and that worked perfectly. And now after almost, it's going to almost be a year, I had many of my podcasts just fall so nicely into that realm or that topic of Find Your Leadership Confidence.
That is such great stuff to think about. Now, another thing that we have to think about is our content. Now, this might be the first thing that you think of and what inspires your idea for your podcast. But as you develop your brand, you need to think about the longevity and your original podcast goals. So for Vicki, she's always thinking about leadership. I've known Vicki for a very long time, and I know she is leadership focused. So this definitely has longevity for Vicki. Now, Currently Obsessed, well, it says right on in our name, it's what we're currently obsessed with. So this definitely has longevity because I'm like a little butterfly, always obsessing about something new. Now, you also need to think about who do you want to listen to your podcast and what do you think that they want to hear about? And how can you create content week after week or month after month to ensure that you never run out of ideas or content? So Vicki, for your podcast, does the guest drive the content for each episode, or is that vice versa?
Yes, for the most part, my guests do drive it as part of my process, my system I have in place. I have an application that they have to fill out. And in that application, it asks them, what are a few questions, 5 or 7 questions that you would be most happy to answer. And then I take that a step further as I'm doing my podcast to organically ask more questions from the questions that they gave answers to that really make it more engaging of a session. So I do enjoy having the standard questions that they know are coming, and then I tell them that there are rapid fire questions coming and that they don't know what those questions are, but they're safe to know that they will be questions that will put them in a great light for the audience to be able to give the audience more richness and more information.
Absolutely. It's so important. Another thing that you actually have to think about is the frequency of how often you're going to publish, right? So you need to choose a schedule for publishing your episodes that makes sense for your lifestyle, for your available time, and your skill set. You have to think about everything that you need to accomplish for each episode and determine not only how frequently you will post, but how far ahead you should work so that you can maintain that schedule. Now, it seems easy enough that you have the idea, you sit down and you record the podcast, but there's actually a lot of things that go into it. So that's what we're going to cover next. But before I move on from this slide, I just wanted to point out that because we were just talking about branding, I've taken just some little screenshots of what our website looks like for Currently Obsessed, and then also what Vicky's YouTube channel looks like. And so you'll see on Vicky's YouTube channel, all of her little thumbnails all pretty much look the same. They have Vicky as her little avatar. She's so cute, with the title of the episode and then a picture, a headshot of her guest. And that way, all of her videos show up and it all looks perfectly branded. The same thing goes on our website. So I just pulled one little piece, but when you go onto our website, you'll see the last 6 or 8 episodes, and we always have something funny that we said as our title. We have, a few little sentences about what the episode will be about, and then we always have a picture of us together. Now, when we were having meetings during Zoom time, when we were in lockdown, we had to take little selfies, and then Danielle would just marry those together, so it looked like we were together in our picture. And so she was brilliant at that. But the next thing we want to talk about is the content and the recording. So Danielle and I have a joke that once we have a Google Doc, we have a Google Doc for every episode, that once we have that document, we're committed. So Vicky, walk us through how you keep your recording and release schedule straight.
So for those of you that don't know, my background is project management. So I am all about the process, the system, and to be, if it's scheduled, it will be done. So I have a scheduler for the guest. And as I mentioned, they can fill out an application. I also am a subscriber of a service called Podmatch, where I get paid for actually hosting. And that has its process, which marries what my process is. So I schedule my guest out. They go to my Once Hub to be able to see what my calendar is and marry it with what works for them. And it's typically now, so anybody that is trying to get on my podcast is looking at late February, March to be able to be scheduled. And then once my podcast is recorded, they're looking at another 2 months till it's put out there, just because of the volume of what I do. I have raw material that I give to my editor, and I use Zoom, and I use Zoom on my computer so that I can, I guess, address what Christine talked about with the voice. Now, my daughter, there are 5 files instead of 3, and she can change the volume using that more, I guess, elaborate system that Zoom has with those 5 files. So she can edit the voice on the person that's my guest as well as mine. And so we can take care of that very easily. And then if I make a mistake, rarely, but now and then, okay, I do it pretty now and then. So anyway, I just write notes on my folder. After I have my podcast, I write notes on the folder of things that I want to remember, if I want to do a summit with this person or further interviews later on in the year. I write all those things, but I also write notes. Hey, Becca, I did this. You need to fix that. Cut out this. Cut it. The middle has a do-over, or my slides messed up. Replace it. So all of those things help to make it smooth. I don't have the pro version of Zoom that I use right now, and so I store everything on my computer, and then I move it to external drive so that my daughter can easily I hand her the drive with a month's worth of stuff and she takes care of it. So you should consider that, and that would be an additional cost if you don't have. It's like, I don't know, trillion bytes. It's a lot. So Christine, what does your recording and release schedule look like?
Well, we always have our episode topics. We have a whole Google document that I'm not sharing on the screen that has every episode number, and we will have the anticipated topic for that episode, in addition to when we think we'll record. What I'm sharing on the screen is our Google Doc, our infamous Google Doc, and we have a template for everyone, so we can just copy this over. And basically, this is the flow of our episode. And we start off with that episode topic. It could be a review of the new, Avatar film, or a discussion about dress codes. And when we first got started, we used the Google Doc for all of our brainstorming, our idea lists, and research links, so we could easily collaborate and just add things on as we recorded. One of the lists that we made was, again, that list of topics. And sometimes, a topic might sound like a good idea, but as you start to flesh it out in the Google Doc, you'll think, this is not, Andrew, I'm actually on the slide that I want to be, I'm pretty sure. It
Yeah.
should say content on the right. Okay.
Yeah. You're
All
good.
right. All right. So whenever we have a new topic that comes up, and if we think that, it's a good one and then it's not, we always have that list to refer back to. Again, this is our episode script, or it's our notes. So once you nail the format of your episode, we recommend that you create this template that lays out the format with all the space for all of your notes. So this should help you curate your content into the format that you designed so that it stays true to your brand. Danielle and I, in our episodes, we always have 3 parts to our podcast. The first thing is us just talking about what our current obsessions are. So you'll see that as the introduction. And Danielle will talk about what she's obsessed with first, and then I will talk about what I'm obsessed. Then we have the body of our podcast. That's typically our main topic. So let's say that our main topic is manners. Well, this will be when we start talking about manners, and maybe we are actually talking about that because we've been watching Bridgerton, and so things are very, very interesting, right? Those are things that you could get obsessed with. The final piece of each podcast is when we put obsessed to the taste test, and this is just when I find weird, wacky food for Danielle and I to try, and we rate it on either we're obsessed with it or we never want to eat it again, and we'll just have a fun little time doing that final segment of our show. One thing that is really important to both of us is that we want our episode to feel chatty. It's important to us that people feel like they're eavesdropping on us. And if you think about when people listen to audio podcasts, it's when they're out on their run, they're driving, they might be doing some chores around the house. So we just want it to be very conversational. So we don't actually script out our entire episode. We just will put notes. When we first started, we had a little bit more of a script, but now that we're much more comfortable, we can just do bullet points. Now, when you schedule the recording, I mentioned before that you might need to work ahead a few episodes so you can stay consistent. Now, this is really important when holidays or family events or travel or even emergencies come up. And, we all know life happens. So rather than have it hijack your podcasting and all the work that you've put into it, work a few weeks or even months ahead of schedule. And that means planning plenty of content to start before you publish your first episode. One thing that we like to think about as well is when we're saying our hellos at the beginning of every episode, we have to be mindful that, if we were recording today, it's raining today. But if the episode we record today doesn't go out until a month from now, it might be sunny and like summer. So we just try to keep our hellos and our references to what's going on in the calendar or that day as very generic. so that we're not pigeonholing and making it super obvious that we're not recording the day that you're listening to it. Now, Vicki, you have a lot of guests. We have guests sometimes, but your whole podcast is you and a guest. So I think you'll agree that one of the most important things about having a guest is you have to prep them. So how are you prepping your guest?
Thank you. That is a great question, and it is really important. Whenever I, agree to have a guest on, I hopefully 2 or 3 days before they come on, I send them a preparing for the podcast email, and it runs through how the show's going to go. It includes the questions that I mentioned that I let them know that I'm going to ask, and it gives them tips if things are not working well with their background or their lighting. It talks about what to do in case of an emergency, power goes out, and bad internet. And if we have to stop and start, having that time, so it helps with the editing. So that document's about 2 pages. I give to them in advance. And then when they come on, I pause the recording and I go through run a show. So I tell them, and as you have that set format, I have my opening little spiel that I give every time. And then I go into welcoming them, giving a bio for them, having the questions that are prepared, then the rapid fire. I share a screen that shows their content of information as well as any gift that they might have for the audience. Then we come back and close, and then I have my standard way that I close. So everybody knows that if they watch the podcast beforehand, they know that that's what we're going to do. They have it in an email that prepares them for that. And then after we're finished and stop recording, I explain to them what's happening next, that they're going to be receiving in about 2 months an email from me that explains to them that it's time to promote. Here is your swipe file. Here is your graphics that you saw on the screen. Here are your social media, a couple posts that you can use or change to your voice. And it all makes things very organized. And I always send to them a thank you for being my guest. So that's what I do.
Well, that sounds, it's a little bit more involved than what we do. But again, you're doing edutainment, I'm doing social fluff. So
and it only takes me 20 minutes because of my system. So I don't want you to think that it's like hours and hours. Oh God, I couldn't do this. It really, once you get into everything, it takes 20 minutes.
Right. Now, we do have the luxury sometimes of recording in person. Of course, if everyone is like Danielle and I right now, today are geographically close, but she's moving to Canada. So this is going to quickly fly out the window. But when we are geographically together, and you can see on the screen, I've included a picture of me and Danielle, and then Michael Varma was our guest, and he talked to us about magic. That was a really fun episode. Now, we have to prep our guests for when we're in person. What we have to say to them is, even though we want our podcast to sound so conversational, it really isn't when you are recording. And what I mean by that is you can't talk over each other. It's really important that you don't talk over each other as much as possible. Part of that is for editing. I always need just a little bitty space in between each person speaking, just in case I have to cut something out. Maybe somebody said something inappropriate, or it wasn't really a great addition to the content. So I just always need that little space in between us speaking. So we do like to practice that before we hit record. We also practice how close each of us sits to the microphone. And, for Danielle and I, it's so natural now to have the microphone and the headphones on. But the minute you put a microphone in front of somebody who's not used to speaking on a microphone, they freak out. So you actually have to practice what that's going to be like. It's very, very important. The other part is to remember that the audience cannot see your hands. If you're doing audio only, can't see your hands. So you have to use words, not gestures. It's very important to be descriptive. Now, once I start recording, Again, I like us to be pretty chatty. So if it's somebody who's very nervous about having that microphone in front of them, I won't hit record. And I have my mixer sitting next to me on the table. Now, I have to remember some people don't like the sound of their voice. It creates a lot of anxiety. So I want people to just be chatting before we start so that they get all that anxiety out of their system, so that once I hit record, the shakiness in the voice is gone. Once I feel that we're all nice and comfortable, I hit record. We don't actually start the episode right then, though, because sometimes they notice my hand moving over and hitting record. They freak out a little bit again. And that's okay. So we'll just keep chatting because I can just edit all of that right out of the episode. Then once I feel that we are nice and relaxed, I will start off. We always start each episode by saying hello to each other and happy podcast day. And that's how the guest knows. Once we start that and we say that, we are in it. We are in the episode. Does that mean we can't start over? No, of course not. We can start over if we had to, but it's nice for them just to understand that cadence. And we have the Google Doc open. Usually the guest is not looking at our Google Doc. We figure that's our stuff and we really are there to interview them. And so we just want them to stay conversational and we don't want them scripted at all. So we don't have them looking at that Google Doc. And then once we are done with our episode, I just stop recording and then whoop, there it is. It's in the bag. And at that point, we thank our guest. And a lot of times we will give them a gift related to whatever their topic was. I can't remember if I bought Michael Varma something about magic or about origami, because I know he likes to fold a lot of origami things. We probably got him something for origami. So that was very fun when he was a guest on our episode. Now, Vicki, when it comes to editing, I know that you use an editor. So are there any considerations or conversations you have with the editor before they work on the episode?
As I mentioned earlier, I do write things down on a file folder because I give her things not that day. You know, I don't have her record or her edit the day that I do the recording because I have so many things already recorded that she has to work on. So I keep those notes in the actual folder. Sometimes I'll put information in an email to her and tell her what's happened. But, you know, for example, I had a person who had terrible connection in part of her house. And so she literally was walking through the house trying to find where she had a good connection until we got to that point. And then we restarted everything. And I just left my daughter that note, just cut out, you know, these minutes. If you can see where it is that the issue was, you know, as you look at the replay, that also helps her to say, you know, at minute, whatever, please cut out and then start again at whatever. So that's very helpful for me to be able to inform her. So, Christine, I think you talked about this, but how do you edit?
I did touch on it briefly, but I'll
Yes.
go in a little more detail now. So there's two schools of thought for editing, and I think this is true for your podcast and, you know, for mine, that you're either going to edit or you're not going to edit. So editing, you're curating your content and you're taking out things that don't necessarily belong. If you choose to not edit, you're going to hear every little gaffe, every misstep, dogs barking, doorbells ringing, all of that. That's going to be included in your episode. And both of those ways are fine. There's been times when things happen in my podcast. I know when I had guinea pigs, very often one of my guinea pigs, Lucy, would be very opinionated about something we were talking about, and she would just start, you know, yapping in the background, and we thought it was cute, so we just left it in. But but you may not want to keep a dog barking in your episode. So if it makes sense for the flow of your podcast, just make sure that, you know, you do that. You would take out anything that doesn't belong. And that is any sidebars, any tangents. Sometimes you might start gossiping and then realize, I really don't want that out in the world. I want to keep that here. So you would take that out. Sometimes there might be silence that you need to take out, or coughing. I don't know why every time I'm recording, I always start coughing. And so I always need to make sure that I take that out.
Yeah.
Again, if you're not editing, just remember that will just be that natural flow of conversation. And you want to think about having that strong content and not going on any sidebars because the audience is going to hear all of that.
Yeah, and have
Yep.
televisions turned down, or I have now restricted my husband to wearing earbuds whenever
Right.
whenever I am podcasting, and I have a little sign in my kitchen now that says on air that my daughter bought for me so that he would know to not come in and from anywhere squeaking doors or
Right.
watching television.
Now, probably what I do when I'm actually doing the editing is very similar to what your daughter would do. And that's, she's uploading that file into whatever program she's using. I'm
Mhm.
uploading it into Audacity, and I just sit and listen to the episode. And I have a little notebook next to me that I can just make some notes because, again, I have to timestamp sometimes if I'm going to be taking out
Mhm.
bits from the episode. I need to timestamp from when I want to take it out until, when I'm gonna where I'm gonna cut.
Mhm.
And I just sit and listen. And the beauty of Audacity is that you can zoom in on fractions of a second to find those moments of silence. And once I take something out, I just make sure that I listen again to where I cut, to where it comes back in, to make sure that the volume levels feel normal. Sometimes there's things I want to cut out and I can't because we were laughing at one point and then we were not laughing. And so how your voice changes.
Yeah,
Well, those become very obvious as you're editing. But don't worry about it being too perfect because remember, I
exactly.
said people are going to be in the car, they're running, they're doing chores around the house. So they're not listening with the same intensity that you're listening to as you're editing. And then once those edits are complete, I'm ready to upload our file. Now, when I say I'm uploading our file, the first upload is actually just to a Google Drive that Danielle has access to so that she can sit and listen and craft everything she's going to input into our website. And then once she's done with the website stuff on Squarespace, I just take and copy everything that she did into Podbean. So now we have
Mm.
our edits complete. Everything's approved and we're ready to upload that file. So Vicky, how are you publishing each episode?
So again, I go back to my system. I have a master document template that really just runs through everything that I'm going to need for YouTube, for the MP3 audio piece, for my website itself, for the social media, and I just plug and play. So once I build my master template, which takes 5 minutes at the most, then I just cut and paste or copy and paste to those different templates that I have. And it's simple. And so it's easy then for me to transfer it into YouTube. And YouTube is great. I just copy the title and then I just copy the full document for the YouTube template and add my graphic, and I'm done with YouTube. And it takes longer for the stuff to upload than it takes for me to put it in there. The MP3 template is just when you have the audio, you have to add to your file the detail about, the episode. And so that's about, I don't know, 8 lines of stuff. So I stick that in. And if you made any mistake in the what you typed, you'll know whenever you go to put it into your website because it will come back and show you that you have an error. So on my website, I have where I put in the user information, and then I put in the posting, which includes all of the links to my various, the excerpts, the episode description, as well as the graphics and the social media links so that people can find it and get to that person. And that information is all, again, the whole process of doing all those things takes about 20 minutes. So it's wonderful to have a system. And if you're going to do a podcast and you don't want to have a lot of hiccups, I would say have a system, and I'm happy to share what mine is.
Yeah, and
So
actually it looks so nice on your YouTube channel because when you click on, the video would be above this graphic that I've included in the slide. But when you click on more, where you can read about more, this is everything that Vicky included. So Vicky and I was a guest on her podcast. And so this is everything that she posted. And I really like this key moments at the bottom. And that's just where you can actually click in and just hear about, you can just go right to that spot
Yeah.
and listen on the YouTube video.
And earlier you were talking about, your audio only. Well, I'm audio and video. So there are times when my guest is doing, as you said, things with their hands and different, visual aids, if you will. And I have to then describe what they're doing or remind them that it's audio only for some people, and that they won't be able to see what's happening. But I prefer the video piece because I can really connect with my audience and feel like we're just sitting across the coffee table having a great conversation. So
Yeah.
talk to me about what you do to be able to complete this.
Yeah, so I think our scheduling is very similar. So what's included in this little screenshot, this is what it looks like on Squarespace when we're including all of the detailed notes that will be published with the podcast. And all of this comes over if it's on Spotify or Apple or Google Play, it will come
Right.
over. And so what we always are including is our episode title. And we want that title format to stay consistent and of course match our brand. And so we always try to keep them pretty light and fun because we try to be lighthearted because again, we're just social fluff, right? It's just kind of fluffy. Other podcasts that are more informative or thematic, they might want to incorporate some keywords in episode title so they're easily searchable. We also like to include a subtitle or an excerpt from our podcast, and that can just be 1 or 2 sentences that entices that listener to hit play. So in our case, this goes in 2 places. It goes into the excerpt field for our Squarespace post, and then it goes into the subtitle field in our podcasting info. So it's important that we have those in 2 different places. And then we have our episode summary guide. So this is very similar to what Vicky has, where she has that little key moments in her podcast. Our episode guide just is very helpful for our listeners if they wanted to go back and start and hear something very specific. It gives them a timestamp so they can find it in the audio file. And then we will have a full description, and Danielle always writes this because she's just a little bit better writer than I am. And that can just be our subtitle of the excerpt plus a summary. And because we have our own website, we like to go the extra mile to entice people to visit our website. It's more than just that podcasting platform. We include links to articles and resources, maybe our guest websites. Those are helpful, and they add value to our listeners and possibly to monetize the site down the road. It's also great for SEO. And then, of course, we will add some metadata, and we will post the categories or maybe tags and our season and episode number and the duration of our episode. Just remember to be consistent. So if you don't want to do all those things, do not start doing them. That
So
would be
for
my
me,
recommendation.
that's one of the things, mine do have, especially the YouTube shows you all of the episode and the length, but now I have over 100 episodes out there, and I have 125 recorded. And so I am going to segment, because I'm looking at how can I make it easier for my audience to see topics that they like, because I have so many that are related. I have from social media tools to dealing with self-care, to dealing with anxiety, to how to grow your business. And so I want the users or the audience to be able to say, oh, I'm going to look at these 12 things on anxiety, or these things about how to really make LinkedIn help you. And so that's one of the next thing. And I guess I'm mentioning that to let you know that you shouldn't make your website static, that it should be, in addition to your episodes that you put out there, you should continually improve the experience for your people that are coming to look.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone that's here on our on our workshop today. I have included Vicky and my email addresses if you wanted to get in touch with us. Vicky, there was a question in the chat. There, John Claude is wondering if you can provide us all of us with the editing software that your daughter uses for editing.
I will have to ask for that, and I
Okay.
will, so if he just puts in the chat, and I'll save the chat, his email address, and I will, or I
All
could
right.
get it to you and you can get it to everyone that's come
Sure.
to this podcast. That would probably
Yeah.
be the easiest.
And then I
Yes.
think one last thing, I did post a little notes worksheet in the chat earlier in our session. And in there, I did have some recommendations on the mixer and microphones and headphones. And some of them have prices. We like to buy things from sweetwater.com. That's an audio website where you can pick up anything that you need for related to audio. My husband is a professional audio technician, and so he is, of course, my source. I haven't paid a dime. He's paid a lot of money for me to have this podcast. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but I see Gregory Reed's there with the red.
Yes, I'd like to thank, on behalf of Founders District, the presenters Christine and Vicky. And you can thank them by clicking the link in the chat to give them some honest feedback. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Great
Awesome
job,
both of
ladies.
you.
Thank you, too. It
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
That was great. Excellent.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice
They're,
job.
they're
Thank you.
asking for the presentation, Christine, too.
My presentation, my slides. Are they useful? Yeah, we can send those out. I know I have them in the folder, and I think Sylvia will be sending the slides out to everybody.
And you have the recording, so the recording shows the slides too. So.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Yep. Thanks,
Oh,
everybody.
and did you tell us where to find your podcast? Did you give us a link or anything?
Find
I-
your leadership confidence.
All right, but that's just go find a podcast.
It's
provider
actually,
and search
it's,
for that, right?
Vicky is on YouTube, so you can just
Yeah.
go into YouTube and say, find your leadership podcast. But
Or
in
you
the-
could search me too, my name.
That's true.
Okay.
Mhm.
In that sheet that I attached earlier in the chat, the outline where you could take notes, I did give links to how to find us. So
Okay,
the
great.
link to Vicky's channel is in there.
All right.
Yes.
Thanks.
And
Thanks,
so
everybody.
you can see my podcast on my website or via YouTube or Spotify or Amazon, Apple and all those
podcasts.
things.
All of them.
All right. Thanks, gals. It was great. Good content. Excellent.
Thanks.
Uh,
Thanks
Thank you.
for
We're happy
having
to
me.
do it.
should
Thank
put
you.
put
So
this
we'll
session
have
up
to-
on YouTube.
Christine, we
to
might.
end the meeting. We're using this account for another session. So
Okay.
Okay,
the time
see you.
is up. Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
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 Thanks.